Hi, everybody. I'm still John Atack, and I don't regret that too much. And this is somebody we met 5 years ago in Manchester, England, at the ICSA conference, and you gave I thought, tremendously insightful and amusing talk. And now you've got to live up to that. So this is Jeremy Sherman. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, it's nice to be here. The upside is that it's 5 years later, so I must know more. On the other hand, I'm 5 years older, so I must know less.
Yeah, it's true,
Yeah,
isn't it?
so we'll have to see. I'm riding the edge here. Um, yeah, so we met at a conference on cults,
Mm.
and I was giving a presentation there, and it was a lovely trip I had taken from California. I live in Berkeley, California, and I had gone to Russia and Estonia prior to the Manchester meeting to give presentations at a conference on biosemiotics. Um, uh, Actually, a couple of conferences on biosemiotics. So this is a little bit of context about my weird approach to cult questions, these issues. I consider myself a cradle to grave researcher.
Mm.
I have worked for 28 years in collaboration with a Berkeley biologist on the issue of the origins of life.
Mm.
How does mattering emerge from matter? How do selves and effort emerge from within nothing but physical chemistry?
Mm.
As a result, I'm a researcher who has a physical explanation for what motivation actually is.
Mm.
I'm a different kind of researcher. So I mostly work in the social sciences. I've written over 1,000 articles, blog articles for Psychology Today. I've written books in psychology. Um, but but I do it from this unusual angle, which is that I actually have an explanation. It could be wrong, but I have a physical explanation for what selves and effort really are, starting from the origins of life. Whereas in the physical and social sciences, we mostly don't. Well, in the life and social sciences, we mostly just assume motivation. For example, if we see effort, we assume motivation. Motivation ends up being an unexplained source of explanation. Because if you ask a top-level psychologist what motivation is, they know it happens in bodies, they know it's physical, they know it's not the chemistry itself. So there's actually a major gap between the physical sciences and the life and social sciences, and I play there. But in the meantime, I also have this background of interest in basically absolutism of all sorts. And part of this comes out of my own personal experience. I lived for 7 years on the world's largest hippie commune by some estimates, called The Farm in Tennessee. I was an elected elder there at 24. And while it doesn't qualify as a cult by the careful definition I've come up with, I am quite clear that I was cultish about it.
Yeah.
That is, and many of us were, but it didn't quite fit the definitions that I think make the most rigorous sense of the distinction between, let's say, a culture and a cult.
Mm.
It was much more open border. It had a sense of irony about itself. That is, it could kid itself in a way that I think is harder for truer cults.
Mm.
There was more diversity. But the point I want to get at is I am very interested in the counterpart to brainwashing, which is the demand side of why we would be. And I do think one of the vocational hazards for in the field of cult research is that if you've come out of a cult, you're going to be more likely to want to attend to the way you were brainwashed than to the ways in which you wanted what I'll call brain purging.
Yeah.
For me, the relief of joining the commune was that I had found a express train to goodness, that I had found a surefire path, that I was done dealing with the doubt-inducing forks in the road because I was on this express train. All I had to do was continue to live that life, And the freedom from doubt, freedom from self-doubt, the sense of a mission was just ecstasy for
Mm.
me, because I was a pretty anxious and disoriented person before then. I was looking for what to do that would give my life purpose. I was ambitious, like many people who join cults. That we have a tendency to be idealistic people,
Mm.
or to have strong or intense aspirational gaps between what we are and what we aim to be, or what
Mm.
we see in the world and what we envision for the world. So, and the other, just one more connection before we turn this back into, I have a tendency towards tunnel vision monologue reveries. My apology, but
That's fine.
but when I look at what an organism would need and want from the very origins of life, it would need and want, even though it doesn't have feelings or thoughts. That is, I'm talking about plants or
Yeah.
single cell organisms. It would, if it could voice a feeling, it would want safety and freedom.
Mm.
Um, that is nothing to impede its progress,
Mm.
and nothing to and the freedom to exercise its full will.
Mm.
Um, so there is, rather than going into the elaborate parallels, there are some simple parallels that I think are worth noting about what you would get, the way you would get both cults and absolutists once you uh, if you combine language with feelings,
Mm.
with the struggle for existence. That is, there's a continuity that I would like to get across, because it's fascinating how this would how cultish behavior would naturally follow from any organism that gained the power of feeling and thought.
Mm. Fair enough.
Fair enough.
A few thoughts for us to play with there.
Yes.
Um, yeah, on the, what constitutes a cult or not, I tend towards the view that the problem is authoritarianism, that which is your absolutism, I presume. That so a cult is a group that's dedicated to a particular leader or to a doctrine. That's what the word initially meant. It's come to, it's taken on a lot of other meanings since then. One of them is that it's necessarily destructive, which it isn't. However, I for a long time used the term totalitarian or totalist. It's a commonplace in the counter cult world. And I started thinking, well, yeah, that's total authoritarianism, a term coined for Mussolini, in fact, originally. But what about the non-total authoritarianism? Is that a good thing? So my concern is about groups that are authoritarian, that force and order their members to do things, and that people follow on. I think what you say about idealism in groups, whether they're positive or negative cults, is absolutely true. That there seem to me to be two particular profiles among members of authoritarian groups, and the one profile, people who want the world to be better, and they're working, whatever that idea may be, and they may be doing something terribly harmful, like on Shinrikyo, killing off as many people as they could with sarin gas. But that was out of a desire to make the world better. It was so that people would get their power, their karma brought to an end, and they'd be able to be reborn in a wonderful new world run by Georgia Sara, which I don't think I'd be very keen on. The other group of people you find in authoritarian groups are salespeople. And you have a very large number of people who are, particularly if you look to large group awareness trainings, multi-level marketing, and groups like Scientology, where people, they want to learn how to sell better. And so the amount of confidence tricksters you find functioning in groups, particularly the ones that demand large amounts of money from their followers, like Scientology, and you have these two quite different sorts of people, the seekers and the salespeople. Yeah, so
So,
pick up something from
okay,
there.
so yeah, so let me step back for a moment to talk about methodology,
Yeah.
because this ties in. So you offered just now your definition, or at least some of the key characteristics of a cult.
Yeah.
Um, this does tie into what I was talking about before, which is how do we do that analysis?
Mm,
And I am saying my approach is actually seeking continuity from the origins of life
mm,
to understanding absolutism. So let me draw a few parallels. So rather than, I mean, there's you could say the blind men and the elephant issue. And it's a big problem across the life and social sciences. We come up with a category that seems self-evident, let's say cult, or let's say something broader like motivation or appetite. These are core currencies in the life and social sciences. We assume that organisms have appetites, okay? And we can talk about the various, the signatures of let's say a cult or of an appetite. And I'm actually doing a different kind of methodology, right
mm,
or wrong, which is I have to explain categories of phenomena from what precedes them.
yeah.
So some of the key moves for me would be the origins of selves struggling for their existence,
Mm,
the evolution of emotion
mm,
or neuronal sentience in animals,
mm,
and the transition to language, the capacity for language, what we call symbol competence,
mm,
which is unique to humans. Only humans have this degree of fluency in our capacity to imagine anything real or fictional, that is to conceive of it, concepts, and these are concepts that trigger emotions.
mm,
So unlike other organisms, sticks and stones may break our bones, but names actually do hurt us.
mm,
Uh, and we are trudging through a sandstorm of potentially mojo eroding possibilities. That is, we swim all day among concepts in our own heads, or whatever we hear, or whatever, all the potential real and imaginary threats and missed opportunities that make human life unusually anxious,
mm,
uncommonly anxious. I think of us as organisms that can imagine the ideal and see where we fall short, and can also self-idealize
mm,
to compensate for it. So we are both an extremely anxious, we're an anxious, visionary, delusional species. We are these mid-sized mammals that are juggling this newfangled contraption called language, and on top of that, technology. But just for the moment, language. Okay, so here's a connection I would make, uh, and how I would come up with a definition of both an absolutist and a cultist. So cult for me would be plural of absolutist.
mm,
Um, there's a paradox at the origins of life, which is we have to struggle for our own existence. We biological creatures are actually fragile. We don't persist by durability the way that a stone does. We have to regenerate ourselves all day because we're
mm,
constantly falling apart. We're up against the second law of thermodynamics. So, for example, today you will produce 330 billion replacement cells, and you'll do this all unconsciously. Now, the thing about it is, to do all that work to regenerate ourselves, we need to take in energy. The problem with energy is that it tends to degenerate things, not regenerate things. Hurricanes don't they don't build houses, they degenerate houses,
mm,
right? Okay, so that means that organisms have always have to engage in selective interaction. We eat food, not toxins. We take in the energy that we can channel into work to regenerate ourselves, and we try to keep out the energy that would degenerate ourselves.
mm,
Now, what happens when you apply that at the level of feelings and thoughts? It becomes confirmation bias.
yeah.
Confirmation bias is taking in the thoughts that we can use to regenerate our mojo, our self-motivation,
Mm,
and not the thoughts that are going to degenerate us. So for me, an important distinction would be that a decent person is someone who recognizes that confirmation bias is a problem they deal with and have to manage.
yeah.
And an absolutist is someone who treats confirmation bias as the solution to all of their problems.
Mm.
Okay, so now that to me is a more grounded definition of an absolutist or occultist than would come from me just doing the thing that is the typical in the life and social sciences, which is you kind of look at it and you do an impressionistic analysis and say, yeah, it has these characteristics in common. Mine is actually kind of a deep etiological approach to this issue. That is, I'm looking no gaps, continuity, trying to understand what would be going on if that would get us to the place where the world has cults and absolutists. Okay, so
Yep.
yeah, trying to illustrate a different approach to how you shop among interpretations of what a cult would be.
Mm. It's interesting because we have, of course, physical homeostasis, which we have to maintain because otherwise we die if it gets too hot or too cold. We don't have food as energy. But we also have a psychological homeostasis, um, and which you're touching upon, so that we need to maintain our feelings. We need to have enough positive feeling to motivate us to do something, and we use confirmation bias, also by some people called my side bias, which I quite like, because it, unlike most psychological terms, it says what it actually means, without going wandering off into Greek or
Yeah,
something.
I hate the term Dunning-Kruger. I mean, don't name it after yourself. Give us something descriptive.
Exactly.
I have coined the term the Sherman Effect for naming things after yourself.
I like that. That's great. I will use that. It now has a
No,
name.
but don't attribute it to me. I was only kidding.
No, I will bleep out the word Sherman in it.
There we
So
go. That's right.
um, so yeah, I'm very interested in ideas that Eric Fromm was touting in the sort of 40s and 50s and 60s. One of the ideas he put forward, which he doesn't, to me, seem to fully connect, in Escape from Freedom in 1941, he's trying to understand Nazism, having escaped from it, because in 1933, being both Jewish and a communist, he decided he'd probably better not stay in Germany. And he comes to this idea, and he gives it a number. He says about 60% of people never develop a self. They have a pseudo self. So they look, it's sort of like the mirror self idea, that those people who just looking to do what they're meant to do, and keep up with the Joneses, or be wearing the right color shirt, or have the right kind of car, and their judgment is all from the outside. And From puts this idea forward, and then 24 years later, in The Heart of Man, he gives us the idea of the malignant narcissist. And this will become the basis for the narcissistic personality disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American
Sure.
Psychiatric
Yeah.
Association,
Yeah.
Volume 5. I have to say all of that just in case somebody doesn't know what DSM-5 is. And here we have this conundrum that basically a small amount of these people who have a pseudo self, who, as he puts it, don't know how to love, so it's
Yeah.
not a
I've heard
matter that
that
they love
before. Yeah. Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
The word is all wrong. They're not narcissists at all, but they need adulation and praise from others to give them a sense of self. The problem I have is that a tiny amount of people, less than 10%, are malignant narcissists. He's got 50% of the rest of the population in this category. And I think there are ways
Yeah.
we might say
Yeah.
that having a pseudo self means being immature. It means not having grown up and completed the process of becoming
Yeah,
adult.
yeah, I don't, yeah, I'm not happy with any of those definitions, and let me give you some
Mm,
suggestions about how different ways of looking at it.
yeah,
First of
absolutely.
all, there is this tendency to assume that this is a personality characteristic,
Mm,
um, and that that it's congenital, and there's also a tendency to think that it comes from a deprivation of love in childhood or something like that, some kind of trauma like that. These are standard kind of folk psych
mm,
myths that are also show up in the literature. It's not atypical to see that stuff in there.
mm,
I don't buy any of that. I think that the numbers vary depending on what's going on in the culture, that you can end
yes.
up having epidemics of it. I think we're undergoing an epidemic of it these days, which
I
includes
agree.
cults and counter cults. That is, it's not just one cult taking over, but they tend to generate their opposite cults. Different, the opposite lifestyle brand, but the same basic MO. That's how I think of it.
Mm,
Um, uh, uh, I don't buy the thing about love. I think love is more complicated than we understand. Love is a
agree.
strong preference. When you love something, you hate its opposite. The more you
Mm,
love something, the more you hate its opposite. We don't understand what we really mean by love.
yeah.
It's a virtue term. One of the things that cults do a lot is
Mm,
they rely on virtue and vice terms, these very loaded terms. And what I've noticed about them is that the more loaded a term is, the less attention goes into operationalizing it, defining it. That
mm,
is, so you take this with the official brand names, MAGA, Make America Great. No one's gotten around to defining that, uh, uh, operationalizing it. But also a word like love has this.
mm.
In fact, I have noticed only recently that the main positive terms we hear these days, love, care, kindness, niceness, compassion, all of them,
Empathy.
if you empathy, if you actually translate all of those down to what they practically mean, they mean accommodate.
Mm,
Accommodate me. If someone says we should love more, we're saying everybody should accommodate everybody, which is the
mm,
golden rule. And it also is not a rule. It actually doesn't solve anything. So the golden rule doesn't solve anything. It's basically saying everybody should accommodate everybody. When people say love is the answer, what they're basically saying is, I like ice cream. Ice cream should be free to everyone in the world. It's as vacuous as that.
mm,
And don't get me wrong, I love carefully and I love lots. Um, when people would, if someone referred to me as unloving or uncaring, I'd have to say, you might think I'm trying to be loving or caring. I'm not. I'm trying to care and love about the right things, not the wrong things. Love is not the answer. It's the question, what to love.
mm.
So, so going back to that definition of what a malignant narcissist is, I have trouble with all of these clinical diagnostic terms. That one's a particularly interesting one. So one thing that's funny about narcissists is, though they're named after someone who couldn't stop looking at himself, you can't get a narcissist to look at themselves for love
Mm,
or money. I mean, that's one thing. And the
absolutely.
other thing is, what does malignant mean? It means this is not going to end well, is
Mm,
basically what it means. It's just, so the quantity of fake objectivity that gets planted in these diagnostic terms, it's no wonder to me that now we have a bunch of people basically armchair diagnosing their ex-partner as a malignant narcissist or whatever. I mean, because the terms, these are early days in psychology,
mm.
and we are doing this kind of vague taxonomy that's based on impressions, and I don't think we've quite nailed it yet.
No,
Um,
I have to agree. And I think that goes across the boards. When Havelock Ellis introduced the term narcissist as a
yeah.
psychological term, he meant by it somebody who doesn't want to have sex with anybody but themselves. And so I think he came pretty close to the original Narcissus and Echo myth. Um,
That's
and
it,
then,
it's funny. It's someone who doesn't want to have sex with anybody but themselves.
mm, yeah, the great
That's funny. I mean,
masturbator, as Salvador Dali would put it.
okay, so now there is a great connection across. I actually want to tie this
Mm,
together.
mm,
Um, uh, I call myself a psychoproctologist, which means I'm studying assholes. I don't like the term asshole. I use it once in my book called What's Up with Assholes. It's on the cover and one's inside. I don't like it because it's not precise. It's not, and
mm,
also you can't use it with kids. But I am very interested in what's going on with such people. And I'm interested in the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of assholery.
yes.
Um, Okay, so the prevention side is this is where masturbation comes in.
Mm,
Um, I described us as an extremely anxious species,
mm,
trudging through a sandstorm of mojo eroding possibilities.
yep.
I think we need um, affirmation like a hummingbird needs nectar.
Mm.
We gotta get affirmed, and not only that, we need to not feel needy. It would be disaffirming for us to admit that we need affirmation, so we don't, and we turn a blind eye to whatever affirmation we're getting, and don't even notice that we're getting it because we're kind of embarrassed that we need affirmation. Um, uh, and don't notice it until it dries up. If if a partner leaves you, or you lose your job, or something else of your affirmation infrastructure disappears, suddenly you feel it, and suddenly you notice it. It's got downright humiliating to realize that you were so dependent on this affirmation. Okay, I have a model for how to do that. So the prevention side of assholery is to find safe outlets for your need for delusions of grandeur. A human needs delusions of grandeur to maintain, to regenerate, is my argument.
Okay.
And that we have to do that through safe escapism, what I call strategic gullibility, what I call optimal illusion. And I am trying to demote some highfalutin versions of that to a elevated status that I hold for all forms of self-affirmation.
Mm.
So actually, so to me, a Trump rally, a religious service, masturbation, video games, shopping, like shopaholic shopping sprees,
Mm.
um, uh, identifying with heroes and anti-heroes in fiction. This is all of the same form.
Mm.
They are all what I would call them egotainment. That is the ego boost that comes from these little mojo replenishing pit stops that we take. Gossip, flattery, snarkiness about other people, that is, disdain for other people, would also fit in here.
Mm.
It would be the exercise of a sado-narcissistic urge that I think is in every one of us. There are two ways to self-elevate, why we would need to do this, and I want to honor this appetite in us.
Mm.
I even think so. So masturbation is the perfect combination of two taboos. One is a sex taboo, and the other one is the self-affirmation taboo. I
Mm.
think they are very similar taboos. If you look at how they play out, how we are driven by our need for affirmation, are driven by our need for sex, embarrassed by it. We compete to be less sexual or more sexual, more egotistical or less egotistical. It's just fascinating. So this week I coined the term libigo for the ego replenishing part of libido. That is, the part of me that wants a partner, not because I need a companion and love and all that, but because I need someone to affirm me. That would be
Mm.
libido.
Mm.
So yeah, so there's some connections, and so what I want to do is I want to show due respect for masturbation.
Mm.
I am actually someone, so just for the record, um, uh, uh, masturbation is part of my ablution regime. I'm 68. I am very grateful that my lack of appetite finally caught up with my lack of aptitude for partnership. I'm not good in partnership. I'm too mouthy, as you can tell. So I drain the lizard, and and to draw a parallel. So just to make a connection here.
Mm.
But not to the sex, because I've already shared far too much. I've been to Trump rallies,
Mm.
and I have been to death metal concerts.
Mm.
They are almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
In that there's cosplay, that is, you're getting dressed up in costumes, you're chanting along with badass lyrics that you're not paying any attention to the content on. You just feel like a badass for saying them. The only difference I was able to notice is what happened in the parking lot after.
Mm.
After the death metal concert, people got in their car and got back to reality. After the Trump rally, people thought they had seen something more real than reality.
Mm.
So to me, it's not how far out you go in your masturbatory fantasy. It's about whether you remember to come back.
Mm.
It's about whether you remember to zip up and get back to reality after you've jerked yourself off.
Mm.
Jerking yourself off is an honorable, necessary, I think, a world-saving thing for us to do. We got to drain that ego lizard somehow. Okay, so to me, take your flights of fancy, but always with a return ticket to reality
mm,
secure in your heart pocket.
mm.
That's what I'd consider to be optimal illusion, kidding yourself in ways that help more than harm.
Yeah. Yeah, Joseph Campbell said that we should treasure our vices, and because that way we know we're human. And he certainly was human. He was a man with various
Right.
vices.
And actually, so what I want to put my vices on the table
Mm,
where we can keep an eye on them and manage them.
mm,
And I think that the denial of the vices puts them on the black market, and that this would be especially true of our need for affirmation.
mm,
No one says, hey, I joined this cult because I needed to feel greater confidence in myself. That would, admitting that would only undermine the motivation. You don't want to admit that that's what you're doing, is that you join for the praise you're getting,
mm,
or for the self-congratulations. Or you wouldn't say, yeah, I watched that movie because I needed to pretend I was as good as the hero. You wouldn't say that stuff. And yet, if you can say that stuff, you can manage it.
mm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I I don't like the term narcissist. It's wrong. I do see the idea, and it seems to be frequently repeated. Schopenhauer, um, who I've largely avoided, um, again had this 60% people. Stanley Milgram, in his first Yale experiment, had 62.5% of people who were willing to go, to the 4X. More recently, Jane McGregor, who's a psychologist here at Nottingham University, has put forward the idea that there are, she uses the term apath to describe the 60% of people who, let's say, are responsive to authoritarian control. We're all responsive to some degree, but there are people who um, they don't want appreciation for what they do. They want admiration. They want adulation for what they do. There's a kind of different degree. And when we get to, say, somebody like Scott Malkin, who's at Harvard Med School and wrote, for me, it's a standard textbook on narcissism, which I find utterly bizarre. And he puts forward the idea that there's such a thing as healthy narcissism, which I think is an interesting concept. But for him, narcissism is measurable on a spectrum, with healthy narcissism at the center, egoism, where you don't want anybody to love you. And all he comes down to as a definition is feeling special. And so, which
Yeah,
I
no,
think just wanders off into the desert. It's of no use
no,
to
that's
us
right.
at all.
Okay, so in my book, I say we need a more descriptive term than any of these.
Mm,
And I come to this term after like 200 pages of exploration. Um, Trump bot, with a small t. And since then, I've come up with a term that I think is simpler and gets at it nonetheless. So Trump is an interesting term. It means two things. It means fake, that is originally meant fake. And
Trumpery.
it also originally meant beats everything.
Mm,
So what Trump bot robotically plays trumped up trump cards, what I think of as wild card trump cards. That is, I can do anything, whatever I do is unassailable. It's
mm,
total freedom and total safety, which I say an organism would want. Okay.
mm,
Since then, I've come up with the term hero bot. That is, they robotically play hero. Um, and uh, and there, I had an interesting exchange a couple of weeks ago with this personality psychologist named Dan McAdams. I read his book. I saw an article about his work. He wrote a book called The Strange Case of Donald Trump. And I read the book, and in it, he argues, first of all, he does a wonderful job of arguing against so he's a personality psychologist, but he doesn't want to go with these diagnostic labels.
mm,
And that is, he makes a wonderful case about why they're dubious.
mm,
Um, and yet he's still trying to understand Donald Trump's behavior. And he comes to the conclusion, the theme of the book is that Donald Trump is an episodic man. By episodic man, meaning he has no life narrative, there's no growth story, there's no hero's journey kind of thing.
mm,
He lives moment to moment, case by case. So I wrote to him after reading the book, and I said, because I'd been making some videos on this topic, whether you start out with a conscience or a narrative or any kind of lifelong memory, if you get on the bandwagon, if you get on the, you could say the gravy train of the pay dirt of this kind of life, where you basically discover the cheap trick formula for playing heroic no matter how the other person responds.
Mm.
If you get on that, you will become an episodic man. Your conscience won't disappear. It will be completely satisfied. It will be permanently affirmed, perma-affirmed. So a difference between a sociopath may have no conscience or no feelings hooked up to the conscience. I assume that a narcissist has a perfectly appeased conscience. That is, they always have, often with a master excuse, which is, I can do anything, whatever I do is unassailable because I am X. That is a brand name, something like that. But once you're on that gravy train, it's not only unnecessary to have a active conscience or a life memory of who you are, it becomes a downright inconvenient. You can't actually afford to have them. So yes, of course, you'll make them dormant. So this is, once again, I'm not interested in the taxonomy of people so much where you say 60% are this way. I'm assuming that pretty much anybody, if they were enticed by the extremism that would appeal to them most in the moment, whatever lifestyle brand or ornamentation happens to resonate with them given who they are in the moment, that any of us could become susceptible to using this cheap bag of tricks. It's a bag for feeling right, righteous, and mighty. And also completely harmonized. So another connection to the other work I do is the dark triad personality is another one of these kind of taxonomies where you say, I'm going to combine these three things, basically reverse engineering. No, I have a different approach to it. I can find it in the origins of life, and I can find it in our visions of God. God is an absolutist. He's absolutely eternally right, righteous, mighty, and internally consistent. And if you look at those, the right, righteous, and mighty, they correspond to omniscience. They correspond to Machiavellian, narcissistic, and sociopathic. Right? They look exactly like that. And what you notice also about it is that they're an absolutist is totally inconsistent in every respect except for their declaration that they are totally consistent. So it's also like God. So for example, when you ask a question about God, could he build a mountain so big that he couldn't move it, which would mean that either way he's not omnipotent. The standard theological answer is he wouldn't, because God never contradicts himself.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also so I think that God wasn't made in man's image. He was made in an asshole's image, at least this monotheistic God. And it would be exactly the state we would aspire to. And if we can't actually achieve it, what we can do is humble ourselves before the Lord, the name droppable Lord, and then lord it over other people. So that, and we can do that whether we're secular or religious, one way or another. We can do that. We can borrow the credibility of some fabricated hero bot, some Donald Trump or God or whoever.
Yeah, and again, Campbell's been mentioned twice in this conversation so far, and I think his idea that we can trace so much of human culture back to Sumeria, and this idea that you have an imperial figure who is gifted divinely by God, and our Western societies and the significant Eastern societies as well seem to have derived from this idea of an absolute figure, an authoritarian. Now, of course, the Indus Valley civilization in what is now Pakistan had 700 years, it appears, without war, without leaders, without priests, and they seemed to manage to get along, which I think is reassuring, the kind of single possibility of progress among human beings. I presume you know Graeber and Wengrow's Dawn of Everything?
I know. Yeah, I've read all of Graeber's books and liked them plenty. But yeah, I have a slightly different take. But then I'm no. I used to be what I'd call a pause optimist. That is, I thought we needed to have a vision of where we could go, and that if we make that vision enticing, then people will go. In fact, that was a lot of what drove me to the commune. We were
Mm,
we were an eco village. We were trying to demonstrate a graceful life that others would be drawn towards.
mm,
And as a peace activist, and I founded and ran a 75 chapter environmental organization that celebrated peace and all of that. Well, I flipped at some point. I'm now a negative optimist. I am still an optimist, but I'm an optimist like an oncologist or a criminologist. And I think that the same might be true of you or anybody in cult studies. That is, in order to make the world a better place, we're paying attention to what keeps on hamstringing us, what keeps on tripping us up. I've lost friends in the last month over this. They simply assume that I'm a cynic and a pessimist.
mm,
And I say, no, no, you wouldn't say that an oncologist is cynical because he's trying to understand cancer, or that a criminologist is. And
mm,
I'm no, and I do think that positive optimism tends to sideline people into virtue signaling. That is,
yeah,
you're not actually bringing about this vision, but you do get to pretend you're Moses. Um, uh, so so here's my take on it, which is wherever this starts, it would start with language. In
mm,
fact, I would argue that anywhere in the universe that life achieves symbolic competence, the
mm,
capacity we have to work with concepts, they would come up with monotheism, they would come up with cults, that this would simply fall out of what it is to be an anxious living being struggling for its own existence,
mm,
who now has the capacity to imagine anything.
mm.
And what they would imagine would be figments of ultimate satisfaction and paths to those figments of ultimate satisfaction.
Yeah.
So where it started doesn't matter to me. The idea, you remember, I'm a guy who lived David Graeber's vision up close. I was
Mm,
a member of a 1,400-person commune, and we did sustain it. I know the joys of it. I also know the fragility of it. I know that it tends to tip in directions that where it's hard to maintain. What you talked about as homeostasis
mm,
is actually, to me, it's checks and balances. Um, and what it actually is balanced checks. That is, thing systems that are constraining each other in
mm,
ways that maintain them.
yeah,
I see the origins of life as a balanced checks thing, two
mm,
dynamics that actually prevent each other from ending.
yeah,
Um, so that is always a kind of a fragile thing, and it becomes especially fragile once you've got language and technology,
mm,
because you can just imagine your way out of having to manage it,
mm.
having to manage the checks and balances. We're a really unusual species.
Yeah, and language, of course, affords us a, a huge memory that,
Yeah,
and the cultural transmission. I know,
yeah.
Yuval Noah is a mutual friend, and the work that his mentor Eva Jablonka has done on evolution, showing not only do we have epigenetics alongside natural and sexual selection, but we also have cultural transmission. And so I was very taken up in the 90s with all the chimps and bonobos thing, and how much of this do we have in us, and all of the, what did we do on the savannah? And then one day you say, we have cultural transmission, the past has become irrelevant. We have the power of thought, and we have the power to transform ourselves. We are not caught into the modules that Yuval Harari imagines. We don't have a religion module, as Scott Atran puts forward, that means that we have to behave in a certain way. We have a competence of thought. We're able to change our minds. We are much more than is dreamed of in these formulations. Um,
Let me ask you. I think I might have heard you say something. And I want to check on it. So, once we have cultural transmission,
mm.
do you? What happens to our biological transmission as well? Do you think that it's still operative in us? Are we still, or have we transcended that in a way where we can think our way? We can decide to be different than we are.
Yeah,
We can choose.
yeah, I mean, and right down to at a genetic level, and I'm interested. I think in 20 years' time we might have a rather different view of genetics to the view that we have now. But the presumption in, say, the Mendel-Dawkins model is the read-only gene, that the gene is selfishly perpetuating itself. This isn't in fact true. Genes are not read-only. We have epigenetics. We know that genes can change and are in transformation all the time. So you don't have a fixed thing going forward, only affected by sexual selection, let's say. We have this capacity of transformation, which will be, and I don't have any sense of there being anything separate to our physical being, that anything that is spiritual or psychological is an aspect of a complete whole. It's not a separable entity, that will depart from the body
Sure.
at death or something.
Yeah.
It's complete. And I mean, I've come to see that as rather wonderful. For
Yeah.
me, it's not in the least bit negative. It's a lot more positive than the religious
y-
beliefs that people try to sell me.
Yes. Yes. So, yeah. And I want my analysis to inform my advocacy. I don't want my advocacy or preference or prescription or hopes to inform my analysis. Um, and I consider that a difficult thing for any of us. And it
Yes.
actually fractally, it ties to what you were just saying.
Mm.
So we got two extremes. One extreme would be we are genetic automata. There's nothing we can do to change that. The other one I call romantic humanism, which is the sense that we are wholly different than other organisms because we have language or we have cultural transmission or something like that. Neither extreme works for me. I think of myself and all of us as somnipotent. We have some power to change ourselves. And we're somniscient too. We have some ideas about where we have power to change ourselves, but we probably have less than we would like to think. I've coined the term robo-envy for a quite natural human aspiration that is fed through most books in self-help and most last chapters of most books about social reform, which is this idea that we can simply reprogram ourselves, just decide to be a different kind of being than we are. We can choose to be different, and that we somehow it would be as effortless as reprogramming a computer. And once you've had this epiphany, once you've woken up and seen the light, you will now be transformed and you won't fall asleep again. So I don't hold, yes, I love our phenotypic plasticity. My approach to the biology on it is different from Jablonka's and Yuval's. We've had our conversations about this. But I mean, I think that their model remains mechanistic and like so many models these days in the biology, in life and social sciences, it mixes mechanism and teleology and motivation. So for example, you can talk about a hormone triggering a motivation or an appetite. Okay, so a hormone is a chemical. It doesn't have any motivations or appetites. Triggering is a vague term. What do we mean? Is it trying to trigger it? Is it just cause and effect? Are we talking pinballs? What is this? And then what is a motivation? Well, is it a algorithmic module in the brain? So is it just pure mechanism, or is it a desire for something? All of that is left free form to be. You can equivocate about it all you want. You make whatever model you want of human behavior by positing these different modules. And I think that their work does a bit more of that than I'm trying to do these days. That kind of equivocation. It's funny, I recently read a book by a popular psychologist in which he is arguing about psychopaths and sociopaths who treat us like we are machines. But the funny thing about it was that the guy's explanations for our behavior was all mechanics. So he's giving a mechanistic explanation of the pathology of thinking of us as machines. And he didn't notice that he was doing that because that's a standard practice in the field. Anyways.
Very much so. And we get caught up in so much reification where, as you say, the term love or the term intelligence, that's one of my favorites.
Yes.
These things are treated as if they were actual qualities in the world. Rather than,
we reify them.
Yeah. And I make them concrete rather than treating them as abstract. And we move along in that imaginary universe that has, been processed out. I mean, a simple way of looking at it, in the past is the construction that Freud made, which boils down to libido or thanatos
Yeah,
and
yeah.
seduction theory and these sort of things, and the confidence with which that was asserted by tens of thousands of intellectuals. And there's still vestiges of that left. This idea that if you surgically take a human being apart, you'll find an id, an ego, and a superego somewhere inside there. And it it leads off to all sorts of misconceptions because of reification, because these ideas have been put forward. Your only desire is to have sex with something or to kill yourself. These are the
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah. Yeah,
it
so it tends
reduces
to get
us.
Procrustean and self-reinforcing and
Mm,
and what we call the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. At the same time, um, I don't want to disparage any particular theory for it. Here, I had a successful video last week. It's rare for me to have it. My stuff is too much for um uh but I had one arguing that we're actually waiting for a third scientific revolution,
mm,
which has to do with how we come up with these categories. That is, the first scientific revolution was the development of formalism, logic, and math back in Greece. The
yep.
second one is what we think of it, which is the application of empiricism. But what we don't have is you can come up with mathematical models and test them out in the real world, but your variables have been defined by you in a kind of an impressionistic way. The variables and constants, and this is especially a problem in the life and social sciences. So
Mm,
this was a video I put out. I mean, I got 2,000 views, which is good for me. I don't normally get that many. Um, uh, but it was about emergent reductionism, which is basically the argument that if you really want to understand a category, you have to be able to explain how it emerged within nothing but what preceded it. So it's kind of a sequidisciplinary approach. That
mm,
is, you have to, if I want to understand motivation, I have to be able to explain it from what preceded it, which is physical chemistry. Okay. And I should start at the origins of it, not way up at the level of human consciousness or anything like that. If I really want to understand motivation, I
mm,
have to explain it from its source. Now, this does relate though to how I think about the id, ego, and superego. Because, so first of all, I should say I had 10 years of psychoanalysis, Freudian analysis, starting at age 8. And I
whoa.
didn't think I didn't think much of it, other than it made me extremely shameless. It gave me an opportunity to 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 wince at my own failings long enough that I got to a place where they're kind of funny. I mean, they're quirky enough that I can enjoy ironic, self-effacing humor. That was mostly what I got out of it. At the same time, I have come back around to a variation on it, not these modules that sit in us, but I do think of us as stuck in a tension between three kinds of stories: the likable, the liked, and the likely. Okay. So watch how this connects up. So my first priority is feeling comfort in my own skin. That's why I would engage in confirmation bias. That is, in terms of visceral priority, I don't like to be uncomfortable. I prefer to be comfortable. Feelings are still driving a whole lot in me. Okay.
Mm,
And the feelings are all over the map, but there are feelings I like, and they come from ideas that I like. So there are likable stories. In the
yep.
meantime, I have to deal with reality. I don't have to just get along with other people. I have to actually deal with reality, which will kill me if I attend to it wrong. So
Mm,
there is the pursuit of the likely story,
mm,
the likely story about what's really going on here in reality. And then in between those two is the intermediary of my culture's locally liked stories.
mm,
Now, those locally liked stories are ambiguous. That is, I could belong to a society that straightens me up about reality. I can also belong to a cult that totally deludes me and flatters me. It basically jerks me off to my likable story.
mm,
So the tension between those does, in some ways, relate to id, ego,
mm,
superego.
mm,
Um, and where do they come from? I would say that they reflect the three categories that I think are kind of true, which is We've got our vegetative sentience, which is me having to generate 330 billion cells today and do that without feeling it or thinking about it. So there's a kind of this is what all life has in common. Then there's my emotional self, which is really in the driver's seat for most of my life. That is, if anything's going to drive my behavior, it's comfort in my own skin. And then there's the super ego at a level. It's not just society. The ego is intermediating between me and society. That's what, but if you want to think about the super-ego as reality itself, that is the thing, what we actually have, the real high priority. The problem with cults is that they're completely coherent internally, and they're just completely wrong about nature. That's why they could destroy us all in the way, on the way to destroying themselves, but they are self-destructive, because you can't be big and unrealistic for long, right? So anyway, how you come to these categories is the thing that I want to emphasize here. That is, it's not enough that some notable thinker posited them. It's not enough that they're easily reified. I'm trying to avoid that. What then is the way you come up with these categories? I have this kind of originist approach, which is you have to explain how they emerged from what preceded them. And only then do you have a real sense of what they are. It's a lot.
Fair enough. I think that this is a reasonable point to conclude, but
Yeah,
I would very much like to continue the conversation in the future.
I'd love that. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by your facility at finding expressions to describe things. It's really quite wonderful. And
it's a pathology I've turned into a style. I have a word of the day, a neologism of the day video that I put out.
wow.
I've been doing, 5 days a week. I put out a new one. To name it is to tame it. When I find a trait that doesn't have, if I find a move that doesn't have a name, I give it a name. It actually helps me think. Occasionally they get taken up by others, but I don't expect the world will mostly be using my terms.
Well, I think it's interesting because, as with my side bias rather than confirmation bias, you are using terms that are self-descriptive.
That's right.
Yeah, we don't
all
have to.
All except the Sherman effect. That's the only one I use.
Yeah, and of course we bleep out Sherman whenever we mention that. So
No. I actually have to have my name on it.
Well.
No, actually, there's an ancillary to the Sherman effect, which is naming a disease, adding insult to injury by naming a disease after your bad last name. Asperger's. I mean, come on. Crohn's disease, right?
Yeah.
These are yes. Stop it. Stop it.
What a thing to be remembered for.
That's right. And also insult to injury. Not only do you have this disease, but now you have to carry around this other guy's awful last name.
Kreisfeld Jacobs.
That's right.
Grand. Well, it's been a tremendous pleasure.
Sounds good.
Let's talk again in a month or two, yeah?
I'd love that. I would enjoy that plenty. Yeah, it's very hard to find people who want to talk about this thing and really think about it from new angles, and I appreciate that.
No, I appreciate what you've done. I mean, what I saw, I was blown away at Manchester. I came out of the talk you gave and went, I've just seen a genuine, authentic human being, somebody who actually, and let's get into that word love. I like the word care. I've had problems with the word love for a long time, but it generalized out. But I saw somebody who cared and somebody who was fascinated and determined to comprehend this mess. And that is a rare quality. I think most of us have given up on that long since.
Yeah, for lots of reasons. But curating one's curiosity is charming to me when I see people who are curating their curiosity. Yeah. All right, we'll talk again.
Yes, thank you so much.
I look forward to it. Take care, John.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.